Welcome, dear friend, to this quiet space for rest. Tonight, our journey takes us to a land of breathtaking antiquity, a place where civilization itself seemed to spring fully formed from the fertile earth, a kingdom that endured for over 3,000 years. We travel to ancient Egypt. Let the sounds of your world fade away, and in their place, imagine the gentle lapping of water against the reeds of a great river. Feel the warm, dry air on your skin, and see, under a sky of impossible blue, a landscape of stark and beautiful contrast, a narrow, vibrant ribbon of the most fertile black soil, bordered on both sides by an endless, silent ocean of golden sand. This is the land of Kemet, the Black Land, and its story begins, and ends, with the river. The Nile. For the ancient Egyptians, it was not merely a river, it was the source of all life, a god in its own right, a divine and predictable miracle. Every year, as the rest of the world withered under the summer heat, the great river would begin to swell. It would rise slowly, predictably, spilling its banks and covering the surrounding fields with a rich, dark, life-giving silt. This annual flooding was not a destructive catastrophe, but a cherished gift, a promise of renewal. And when the waters receded, they left behind a land reborn, ready for the plow and the seed. This reliable, rhythmic cycle of inundation, growth, and harvest, year after year, millennium after millennium, profoundly shaped the Egyptian soul. It instilled in them a deep belief in cycles, in renewal, and in the eternal restoration of order from the brink of chaos. The very rhythm of their lives was set by the great, slow heartbeat of the river. From this deep connection to their land, a fundamental concept emerged, a principle so central that it governed their cosmology, their ethics, their politics, and their hopes for the afterlife. This principle was called Ma'at. It is a word that is difficult to translate with a single term, for it meant at once truth, balance, justice, harmony, and the essential, perfect cosmic order established at the moment of creation. Imagine Ma'at as the silent music of the universe, the unseen law that keeps the sun on its daily course, the stars in their predictable patterns, and the great river in its life-giving cycle. For the ancient Egyptians, their world was a triumph of Ma'at over its opposite. Isfet, chaos, falsehood, and disorder. The vibrant, fertile valley of the Nile was a small island of order, a precious gift wrested from the vast, lifeless, chaotic desert that surrounded it on all sides. Creation, for them, was not a completed event in the distant past, but an ongoing process, a constant, daily struggle to uphold Ma'at and to keep the ever-present threat of chaos at bay. And it was from this sacred landscape that their gods were born. The mythology of ancient Egypt didn't emerge fully formed but evolved over vast stretches of time, a complex tapestry of divine beings, cosmic battles, and profound wisdom that continues to captivate us millennia after the last hieroglyphs were carved. These were not distant, abstract deities. They were woven into the very fabric of the world. You could see the falcon-headed god Horus in the majestic flight of the Real falcon soaring high above the cliffs. You could feel the presence of the crocodile god Sobek in the deep, mysterious waters of the river. You could see the wisdom of the ibis-headed god Thoth and the graceful curve of the real ibis probing the marshlands for food. The gods were all around, their stories providing a framework for understanding everything from the changing of the seasons to the mysteries of life and death. The myths of ancient Egypt, with their striking imagery of animal-headed gods, the architectural wonder of the pyramids, and the profound allure of the journey into the afterlife, have permeated our own culture in countless ways. This enduring fascination is no accident, for these ancient stories speak to the most fundamental human concerns: the mystery of creation, the eternal struggle between order and chaos, the stark reality of our own mortality, and the hopeful, persistent possibility of life beyond death. As we embark on this exploration of Egyptian mythology, we will encounter a worldview that is at once alien and surprisingly familiar. We will meet gods who experience recognizable human emotions of love, jealousy, and grief. We will witness creation myths that seem to anticipate modern scientific concepts by thousands of years. And we will explore a vision of the afterlife so compelling that it would influence religious traditions for centuries to come. So let us begin our journey at the very beginning. Before there were gods or humans, before the earth and sky existed as we know them, how did this ordered world, this island of Ma'at, emerge from the chaos? How did the first dawn break? The ancient Egyptians had many answers to this question, different stories from different cities, but all of them began in the same place, in the dark, endless, formless ocean of primordial chaos, a great watery abyss they called the Nun. In the beginning, before there was a beginning, before the concept of time had been born, before there were gods or humans, before the golden sands of the desert and the fertile black soil of the valley, there was only the Nun. Imagine a vast, dark, and formless ocean of primordial chaos, stretching into an infinite and silent eternity. It was an ocean not of water as we know it, but of pure, unrealized potential, a watery abyss that held everything that ever was or ever would be, but in a state of perfect, undifferentiated stillness. There was no up or down, no light or dark, no life or death. The universe was a great, unconscious thought, waiting for a mind to think it. There was only the Nun, silent and waiting. And within this limitless, silent ocean, after an eternity of non-being, a single thought began to stir. It was an act of pure will, a moment of spontaneous self-creation. This was the creator deity, Adam. He emerged not from a mother or a father, but from the power of his own contemplation, the first spark of consciousness in a thoughtless universe. And as he emerged, so too did the first solid ground, a primeval mound of earth rising slowly, majestically, from the endless flood waters of the Nun. This image was a powerful and sacred one for the Egyptians, a divine reflection of their own yearly experience of seeing the dark, fertile land reappear from the receding, life-giving waters of the Nile's inundation. In some tellings of the story, this first piece of creation took the form of the Benben stone, a great, pyramid-shaped object, whose pointed tip was the first thing to catch the light that had not yet been created, a symbol of the first rays of sunlight that would one day break through the eternal darkness. However he first appeared, this self-created deity now found himself utterly alone in the cosmos. He was a solitary consciousness in an infinite void. But Adam was complete within himself, he was a being who contained both the male and the female aspects of creation. And so, from his own divine essence, from his own profound loneliness and his desire for companionship, he was able to produce children without a partner. In a particularly vivid version of the myth, the great creator, through an act of divine and solitary power, brought forth his first two children. They were Shu, the god of the air and of dryness, the first breath that stirred the stillness of the universe, and Tefnut, the goddess of moisture, the first drop of dew in a dry and formless world. In other versions, they were said to have emerged from the Creator's own divine sneeze and saliva, these bodily fluids serving as powerful symbols of a life force so potent it could bring forth new gods. Upon their creation, however, these first two children, the first breath and the first moisture, became separated from their father. They wandered off and became lost in the dark, limitless, chaotic waters of the Nun. Adam, his heart filled with a father's grief, longed for his lost children. And so, he sent his own eye, a powerful divine entity later associated with the goddess Hathor, to search for them in the darkness. The eye, a single point of light and purpose, journeyed through the chaos, and upon its joyful reunion with the lost children, it led them back to their father. Adam was so overcome with happiness and relief that his tears fell from his single eye, down upon the primeval mound of earth. And from these divine tears, which mingled with the sacred soil, the first human beings were formed. This beautiful and touching episode reveals a characteristic and profound Egyptian belief, that humanity originated not from clay or dust, not as an afterthought or as slaves to the gods, but from the very substance of the Creator's own divine emotion. We are, in this telling, the children of a God's joyful tears. Shu, the air, and Tefnut, the moisture, this first divine couple, then came together to produce the next generation of gods, Geb, the earth god, and Nut, the sky goddess. In the beginning, these two were inseparable, locked in a tight and loving embrace, a single, unified entity. The star-covered body of the sky goddess Nut was arched protectively over the reclining, leafy form of the earth god Geb. The world as we know it did not yet exist. There was no space between the earth and the sky in which life could move and breathe. And so their father, Shu, the god of air, performed his most important cosmic function. He stepped between his two children and, with his immense and unseen strength, slowly, inexorably, lifted Nut high above. He pushed her upward, forcing her to form the great, arched vault of heaven, her body becoming the firmament, adorned with the glittering jewels of the stars. He pushed Geb down, to lie beneath as the solid earth, his body becoming the hills and valleys of the world. The space that was created between them became our world, the realm of air and atmosphere, the space in which all life would now flourish, a world sustained by Shu himself. Despite this forced and permanent separation, Geb and Nut, in their final moments together, managed to conceive 5 children. These 5 deities would become the central figures in the great drama of Egyptian mythology, the gods and goddesses whose story would define the very nature of kingship, magic, and the afterlife. They were the wise and benevolent king, Osiris, his devoted and powerful sister-wife, Isis, their jealous and chaotic brother, Set, Set's often overlooked but gentle wife, Nephthys, and, in some traditions, a 5th child, Horus the Elder. These 5, together with their parents, Shu and Tefnut, and their grandparent, the great creator Adam, formed the great Ennead of Heliopolis, the 9 primary gods who would shape the course of Egyptian religion for thousands of years. The stage of the cosmos was now set, and its greatest and most tragic story was about to begin. The ancient Egyptians, in their deep and patient wisdom, understood that a mystery as profound as creation could not be captured in a single, definitive tale. To them, the universe was like a great and complex jewel, and each of their great cities held it up to the light in a different way, revealing a new and brilliant facet of its truth. And so, while the story of Adam and the sun city of Heliopolis became the most prominent, other whispers, other creation stories, rose from the banks of the Nile. They did not see these different stories as competing or contradicting each other. Instead, they viewed them as complementary perspectives, a chorus of voices all singing a different harmony to the same great, cosmic song. Let us journey now from the sun-drenched city of Heliopolis to another ancient center of learning, the city of Kmun, known to the Greeks as Hermopolis, the city of the great ibis-headed god of wisdom, Thoth. Here, in this place of ancient magic and deep knowledge, the priests and sages told a different story. They imagined a time before the first dawn, a state of being even more ancient than the Creator himself. They honored the Ogdoad, a group of 8 primordial deities who existed before creation itself, not as active gods, but as the living, breathing principles of the pre-creation state. Imagine them, emerging from the primeval slime of the Nun, as 4 complementary pairs of male and female entities. There was Nun and his consort Nonnet, who were the infinite, formless, primordial waters themselves. There was Ammonius and his consort Amunet, who represented the profound mystery of hiddenness and invisibility, the unseen potential that sleeps within the darkness. There was Ha and his consort Ha-He, who were the dizzying, mind-bending concept of endlessness and eternity. And there was Kek and his consort Kauket, who embodied the absolute, tangible, and impenetrable darkness before the first light. These 8 ancient gods were typically depicted with the heads of frogs and serpents, symbols to the Egyptians of the primitive, chaotic, teeming life that was the very essence of the Nun. In this telling of the story, these 8 chaotic forces, in a great, cosmic convergence, were believed to have combined their powers, their essences mingling and coalescing in the dark waters. They sacrificed their formless, chaotic nature in a single, great effort to give birth to a perfect, singular potential for order, the great cosmic egg. In some versions of this myth, it was a celestial bird, perhaps a great goose whose cackle was the first sound in the universe, or a divine ibis, the sacred bird of Thoth, who laid this cosmic egg upon the primeval mound as it rose from the waters. For a timeless moment, this egg lay upon the mound, a perfect, smooth, and silent vessel, glowing with a faint, inner light, humming with the latent power of all creation. Then, a great cracking was heard, a sound that broke the eternal silence. The egg hatched, and from it emerged the sun god, releasing the first brilliant, dazzling light of creation and marking the beginning of time and the birth of ordered existence from primordial chaos. Now, let our journey take us to yet another great city, the royal capital of Memphis, a city of great architects, craftsmen, and thinkers. Here, a different and profoundly philosophical creation theology developed. According to the Memphite theology, which was preserved for all time on a great slab of stone known as the Shabaka stone, the universe was brought into being not through a physical act, but through a purely intellectual and spiritual one. The creator god of Memphis was Ptah, the patron of craftsmen. And he created the world not with his hands, but with his heart and his tongue, that is, through his mind and his speech. Imagine the god Ptah, in the stillness of non-being, in a state of deep, divine meditation. He first conceives the entire universe as a perfect, ordered thought within his heart, which to the Egyptians was the seat of the mind, of intellect, and of emotion. He envisioned not just the physical reality of the world, but also its abstract concepts, justice, wisdom, kingship, and piety. He even conceived of the other gods, including Adam and the great Ennead, within his own divine mind. Then, when this divine thought was complete in all its intricate perfection, he spoke it into existence. His tongue gave form and substance to the thoughts of his heart. His commanding voice, the creative logos, rippled through the void, and with each word, a part of the universe sprang into being. This sophisticated creation account, in which the universe is born from a divine utterance, is a powerful idea that suggests the profound philosophical depth of Egyptian theology at its most abstract. And these were not the only whispers of creation heard along the Nile. Throughout the land, in the various nomes and districts, numerous other local traditions flourished. In the far south, at the border city of Elephantine, the ram-headed creator god Khnum was believed to be a divine potter. Imagine him at his great potter's wheel, situated on the very banks of the river. It was he who took the dark, rich, fertile clay of the Nile in his divine hands, and patiently, lovingly, fashioned the bodies of the first humans, and all the animals, before breathing the spark of life into them. In the city of Esna, it was the great goddess Neith, a powerful and ancient deity of war and weaving, who was credited with weaving creation itself into existence on her cosmic loom, her shuttle moving back and forth through the darkness, creating the intricate, interconnected tapestry of reality. Across all these varied creation accounts, certain fundamental themes consistently emerge, like the great, steady, unifying current of the Nile itself. Creation always begins with the formless, dark waters of chaos. A primeval mound always provides the first solid ground upon which life can begin. The creator deity is typically self-generated, arising from nothingness through their own immense power. And most tellingly, creation is never making something from nothing. Instead, the creator gods organize, separate, and transform the pre-existing chaotic elements into an ordered and meaningful reality. This multiplicity of creation myths, this chorus of different voices all singing a similar story, reveals a sophisticated religious sensibility, one that recognized the limitations of any single explanation for the ultimate mystery of existence, and chose instead to embrace them all. From the many whispers of creation, a stable and ordered cosmos had emerged, a world of divine principles and natural rhythms. And at the very center of this new divine assembly, at the heart of its daily life, stood Ra, the great sun god. His journey was not merely the movement of a star across the sky, it was the most visible, most vital, and most reassuring cosmic pattern of all, a daily drama that structured time, sustained all life, and demonstrated the everlasting cycle of renewal. He was the king of the gods, the great creator who ruled from his celestial throne, and his primary duty was to maintain Ma'at, the fundamental order and truth of the universe. Imagine him now, a majestic figure with the head of a falcon, the keen-eyed bird of the heavens whose gaze could encompass the entire world. His head is crowned by the brilliant, fiery solar disk, a circle of pure, unbearable light, which is itself encircled by the uraeus, the sacred cobra, poised to spit fire at any enemy who would dare to challenge the divine order. Ra embodied the very essence of light, of warmth, and of the life-giving energy that flowed down from the heavens to bless the black land of Egypt. For the Egyptians, each new day was a miracle, a daily reenactment of the first moment of creation. The journey began in the pre-dawn darkness, in a state of quiet anticipation. As the eastern horizon began to brighten from a deep, royal violet to a soft, rosy pink, they witnessed the emergence of Khepri, the scarab-headed manifestation of the morning sun. His form was inspired by the sacred dung beetle, a creature of profound symbolic importance. The Egyptians observed this humble beetle rolling a perfect ball of manure across the sand, from which its young would later hatch, seemingly from nothing. They saw in this an image of spontaneous creation, of life emerging from inert matter, a perfect metaphor for the sun's own daily self-creation. And so, Khepri, the one who comes into being, was seen to roll the great, fiery disk of the sun up over the edge of the world, pushing it into the sky with a silent, determined effort. Each sunrise was a profound triumph of light over darkness, of order over chaos, a tangible reassurance that the forces of the underworld had been defeated for another night. As the sun climbed higher into the vast, blue ocean of the sky, Khepri transformed, assuming his most powerful and majestic form, Ra, the sovereign of the daytime sky. From his great solar bark, a magnificent vessel called the Man-Jet, the boat of millions of years, Ra surveyed his creation. Imagine this celestial boat, its prow and stern adorned with gold, gliding silently across the arched, star-dusted body of the sky goddess, Nut. Ra's brilliant light provided the warmth and energy necessary for all life to flourish. The crops in the fields turned their faces towards him, the lotus flowers on the river opened their petals to greet him, and the people in the villages and cities felt his life-giving warmth upon their skin. This celestial journey was not made alone. Ra was accompanied by a divine entourage, a celestial court, a crew made up of other gods who were themselves the personification of the principles through which he governed. At the prow stood Sia, the god of divine perception, his gaze sharp and all-seeing, able to perceive the truth of all things. Beside him was Hu, the god of divine utterance, whose commanding voice gave form to the Creator's will, speaking the laws of Ma'at into existence. And there was Heka, the god of magical power, the very energy that animated the cosmos and protected the solar bark from harm. Sometimes, at the great steering oar, stood the wise and patient Thoth, the ibis-headed god of knowledge, using his profound understanding of the universe to navigate the cosmic currents. Together, they sailed across the heavens on a journey that mirrored the human life cycle, a powerful ascent in the morning of youth, a majestic zenith of power at the midday of maturity, and a gradual, graceful descent in the afternoon of old age. As the day drew to a close, Ra began to age. The fierce, brilliant light of midday softened into the warm, golden glow of late afternoon. He transformed once more, this time into his evening aspect, Atum, the setting sun. He appeared now as an elderly, wise man, still regal, but his back bent with the weight of the day's long journey. He descended slowly toward the western horizon, the place the Egyptians saw as the gateway to the underworld, the Duat. The sky blazed with colors of orange, red, and purple, a final, beautiful farewell before the darkness. But for the Egyptians, this sunset did not signify the sun god's death, nor was it a cause for fear. Rather, it marked the beginning of his most perilous and most significant journey. As darkness fell upon the land of the living, Ra would leave his daytime boat, the man-jet, and board a second, sacred vessel, the Mesek-Tet, the evening bark. On this boat, he would begin his 12-hour voyage through the dangerous and mysterious realm of the underworld, a journey that represented not just the sun's invisible path beneath the earth, but also the journey that every human soul hoped to make after death. The sun's daily descent into darkness was a divine promise. It was the necessary prelude to his rebirth. The sun's unfailing return each morning offered tangible, daily evidence that the universe remained fundamentally ordered, that life could triumph over death, and that even after the deepest darkness, there would always be a new dawn. As the last sliver of the sun disappeared from the world of the living, Ra, in his aged form of Atum, boarded his second great boat, the Mesek-Tet, the evening bark. He crossed the threshold between the lands of the living and the dead, entering the mysterious and dangerous realm of the underworld, known as the Duat. This nighttime voyage, elaborately detailed in sacred funerary texts like the Amjuat and the Book of Gates, was both the sun's invisible path beneath the earth and a model for the human soul's journey after death. The Duat was not a simple void, it was a complex landscape divided into 12 regions, corresponding to the 12 hours of the night, each with its own unique challenges, inhabitants, and fearsome guardians. Imagine the solar bark now, gliding silently on a dark, subterranean river. As Ra progressed through the first hours of the night, he was not entirely alone. The souls of the blessed dead, those who had passed the judgment of Osiris, came to the riverbanks to greet him, their ghostly forms basking in the gentle, rejuvenating light that radiated from his vessel. Friendly deities appeared, helping to pull his boat with ropes through difficult passages. The ultimate aspiration for many of the deceased was to be granted passage on the solar bark itself, to join Ra's divine entourage and become one with his eternal cycle of renewal. But as the journey continued deeper into the heart of the darkness, a terrible sense of foreboding would begin to grow. The waters of the river would grow still and sluggish. The light from Ra's bark would seem to dim. A deep, ancient evil was stirring in the depths. This was the hour of his greatest adversary, the most fearsome being in all of Egyptian mythology, Apep, the great serpent of chaos. Apep, also called Apophis, was not like the other gods who represented aspects of the created world. Apep was anti-creation itself, the personification of the primordial nothingness that constantly threatened to dissolve all existence back into undifferentiated chaos. He was an enormous serpent of many coils, described as being as long as the underworld itself, his very presence a threat to the fabric of reality. Each night, in the deepest hour of darkness, Apep would attack. He would attempt to halt Ra's journey by drinking the waters of the underworld river dry, to strand the solar bark on the dead sands. Or he would try to hypnotize the divine crew with his terrible gaze. His ultimate goal was to coil his immense body around the solar bark and suffocate Ra's divine light forever, plunging the universe into eternal darkness. This nightly cosmic battle represented existence's fundamental struggle against dissolution and entropy. To overcome this ultimate threat, Ra relied on his divine companions. The gods and goddesses on the solar bark would take up their weapons. And foremost among them was the god Set. Set, the god of deserts, storms, and disorder, with his own chaotic and violent nature, was the perfect adversary for the great chaos serpent. With spears of light and magical knives, the gods would battle Apep, cutting his great coils into pieces. And in the temples back in the world of the living, priests would perform their own rituals, symbolically destroying images of the serpent by stabbing wax effigies or burning papyri bearing his name, their magic adding to the divine power being used to protect the sun god. Yet, like chaos itself, Apep could never be permanently destroyed. He was immortal in a way the other gods were not. Though he was defeated each night, he would regenerate in the darkness, ready for the battle to begin anew the following night, a powerful and eternal reminder of the constant vigilance required to maintain the cosmic order of Ma'at. After this climactic confrontation, with Apep defeated for another night, Ra's bark would sail into the deepest and most sacred hour of the night. Here, a profound and mystical union would take place. Ra, the Lord of the Sky, would merge with Osiris, the Lord of the Underworld, uniting for a time the powers of solar and chthonic regeneration. This union allowed Ra to absorb the rejuvenating energies of the underworld, while simultaneously bringing the vital light of the sun to the blessed dead who dwelt there. By the 12th and final hour of the night, Ra, now revitalized, had completed his transformation back into his morning form, Khepri, the scarab beetle. As he approached the eastern horizon, he was depicted as an infant within the solar disk, ready to be reborn into the day sky, sometimes shown emerging from the body of the sky goddess, Nut, who had swallowed the sun at dusk and now gave birth to it again at dawn. His unfailing return each morning offered tangible evidence that the universe remained fundamentally ordered. If the great sun god could descend into darkness, confront the very embodiment of non-existence, and yet always return, then perhaps human souls, too, could triumph over their own challenges, and find a path to rebirth and eternal life. With the eternal journey of the sun god Ra setting the great, rhythmic heartbeat of the cosmos, a vast and vibrant pantheon of other deities arose to govern the myriad aspects of creation. These were not distant, abstract figures, but living, breathing presences who were woven into the very fabric of daily life. They were the divine administrators of Ma'at, the cosmic order, each with their own unique responsibilities, their own sacred duties, and their own stories. To understand them is to understand the rich and complex inner world of the ancient Egyptians. Let us first turn our attention to the quiet, cool light of the moon, and to the god who governed its gentle, silvery glow, Thoth. Imagine a serene and scholarly figure with the body of a man and the head of a sacred ibis, that graceful, long-beaked bird seen waiting patiently in the shallows of the Nile. Thoth was the god of wisdom, of knowledge, of writing, and of magic. He was the great divine scribe, the secretary of the gods, his pen moving silently across an endless scroll, recording all that had ever happened, all that was happening, and all that was yet to come. In the great celestial court, when disputes arose among the gods, it was the calm, measured voice of Thoth that would be heard, offering wise counsel and mediating a just resolution. He was the master of the sacred hieroglyphs, the inventor of writing, and it was believed that his knowledge of divine words held the very power of creation itself. As the moon, he was the lesser light, the gentle counterpart to Ra's blazing sun, governing the night and measuring the passage of time, his phases creating the first calendars. He was a god of serene intellect and profound, quiet power. Now, let us turn from the cool light of the moon to the warm, golden glow of joy, and to the goddess who embodied it, Hathor. She was one of the most beloved and ancient deities in all of Egypt. Imagine her as a beautiful, benevolent goddess, sometimes depicted as a woman with the gentle, curved horns of a cow cradling the sun disk, or sometimes as the great celestial cow herself, whose star-dusted belly formed the very sky. Hathor was the goddess of love, of music, of dance, and of joy. Her presence was felt in the sound of the sistrum, a sacred rattle whose gentle shaking was believed to soothe the gods and drive away evil spirits. She was a protector of women, a goddess of fertility and motherhood, her temples places of celebration and life. Yet, this gentle goddess of joy had another, fiercer aspect. In times when humanity grew rebellious and threatened the cosmic order, Ra could send forth his eye, which would manifest as the lioness-headed goddess Sekhmet, a terrifying force of destruction. But even in this fierce form, her purpose was to restore Ma'at, and it was often Hathor, in her gentle form, who would soothe the rage of the lioness after the threat had passed, a powerful symbol of the balance between creation and destruction. From the joy of life, we now turn to the great mystery that follows it, and to the solemn guardian who presides over that transition, Anubis. Imagine a figure with the body of a man and the head of a sleek, black jackal. The jackal, a creature often seen silently prowling the edges of the desert cemeteries at twilight, was not a symbol of death to the Egyptians, but of protection. Anubis was not a god of death, but the god of embalming and the afterlife, a gentle and reassuring guide for the souls of the deceased. His presence was felt in the quiet, sacred space of the embalming workshop, amidst the scent of cedar oil, myrrh, and other holy resins. It was Anubis who oversaw the intricate process of mummification, the sacred art that preserved the physical body so that the soul could journey onward. And in the final judgment, it was Anubis who would gently lead the soul of the deceased by the hand into the great hall of two truths, and who would carefully place their heart upon the golden scales to be weighed against the feather of Ma'at. He was a comforting, protective figure, a guardian of the veil between worlds, ensuring a safe and sacred passage into eternity. The great river itself, the very source of life, had its own powerful deities. There was Sobek, the crocodile god. Imagine him, a powerful, muscular figure with the head of a crocodile, the fearsome apex predator of the Nile. Sobek embodied the raw, untamable, and fertile power of the river. He was a symbol of strength and protection, his image often invoked by the pharaohs to emphasize their own power. And guarding the women who gave birth on the banks of the river was Thoth, the hippopotamus goddess. Though the hippo could be a fierce and dangerous creature, Thoth was a benevolent and beloved protector of childbirth and families. Her unusual form, a combination of a hippo, a lion, and a crocodile, seen as a powerful amalgamation of protective forces. And finally, let us consider the protector of the home itself, the goddess Batet. Originally a fierce lioness goddess from the Delta region, over time her image softened, transforming into the graceful and serene form of a domestic cat. Imagine her now, a sleek, black cat, purring contentedly by the hearth in a humble Egyptian home. Batet became the beloved goddess of the home, of domestic harmony, and of fertility. She represented the gentler, more protective aspects of femininity, a guardian against evil spirits and disease. This diverse and vibrant pantheon, with each god and goddess having their own specific role, worked together like a great, complex, and harmonious orchestra to maintain the cosmic order of Ma'at. From the grand state temples where the pharaoh communed with the great gods, to the small household shrines where a family would leave offerings for Batet or Thoth, the gods were a constant and intimate part of Egyptian life. They were not distant beings, but family, protectors, and guides, their stories providing meaning and comfort, and their presence felt in every sunrise, every gentle breeze, and every ripple on the surface of the sacred Nile. In the vast and mythic prehistory of Egypt, before the first human pharaohs ruled the Nile Valley, it was believed that the gods themselves governed the land directly. This mythical era, which the Egyptians called Zep Tepi, or the first time, established the divine pattern for all subsequent kingship. The great creator deity, Ra, having established the cosmos and its fundamental order, ruled as the first king. His reign represented a golden age of perfect harmony, a time when humans and gods lived in closer communion. But after a long and glorious reign, after countless journeys across the sky, the great sun god grew weary of the affairs of the earth. He decided to withdraw, to ascend to the heavens to continue his eternal voyage, leaving the governance of the world to his descendants. And so, in a great divine council, the throne of Egypt passed to his great-grandson, the firstborn son of the earth god Geb and the sky goddess Nut, the wise and benevolent Osiris. With the coronation of Osiris, a new golden age dawned upon the land of Egypt. Before his reign, humanity had lived a more difficult, chaotic existence, closer to the wildness of nature. They foraged for food, their lives dictated by chance and survival. But Osiris, far from being a distant or fearsome sovereign, proved himself to be a great cultural hero, a divine teacher who dedicated himself to transforming Egyptian society. Imagine him now, walking among the early inhabitants of the Nile Valley. He was a majestic figure, his skin sometimes depicted as green to symbolize the vibrant, growing vegetation, his bearing noble and kind. He saw the people's struggle, and his heart was filled with a divine compassion. And so, he taught them. He taught them the arts of agriculture, showing them how to read the rhythms of the great river, how to plow the fertile black soil after the inundation, and how to plant the first seeds of barley and emmer wheat. He showed them how to build canals to channel the life-giving water, and how to store the grain in great granaries to protect against lean times. Under his gentle and patient guidance, the land flourished in a way it never had before. The first great harvest was a time of immense celebration, a testament to the new partnership between humanity and the ordered world. By his side, ruling as his equal, was his sister wife, the great goddess Isis. She was a figure of immense wisdom and powerful magic, her knowledge complementing her husband's gentle strength. While Osiris taught the people how to cultivate the land, Isis taught them the arts of civilization. She established the sacred rites of religious practice, giving them just and compassionate laws that reflected the perfect balance of Ma'at. She taught them the crafts of weaving, of spinning flax into fine linen, and the healing arts, showing them how to use the herbs that grew along the riverbank to soothe their ailments. Together, Osiris and Isis embodied the ideal divine couple, their harmonious partnership a perfect reflection of the cosmic order. Their reign brought unprecedented prosperity and peace to the land. This was truly a golden age, a time when Ma'at reigned supreme. In the Egypt of Osiris, there was no hunger, for the fields always yielded a bountiful harvest. There was no warfare, for all disputes were settled by wise and just laws. There was no falsehood or injustice, for the king and queen themselves were the living embodiments of truth and harmony. The villages along the Nile were filled with music and laughter. It was a time of perfect, unblemished peace, a world operating in perfect alignment with the divine order. But this harmonious reign, this perfect world, awakened a dark and dangerous emotion in the heart of their brother, Set. Set was the lord of the Red Land, the Dishret, the vast, barren, and chaotic desert that bordered the fertile black land of the Nile Valley. His kingdom was a place of scorching sun, of howling sandstorms, of scorpions and serpents. He was a god of storms, of disorder, and of untamable, violent strength. As he looked out from his desolate kingdom of sand and rock, he saw the prosperity and harmony of his brother's realm, and his heart was filled with a burning, corrosive jealousy. He resented his brother's popularity. He coveted his brother's throne. And, some stories say, he desired his brother's wise and beautiful wife, Isis. This personal ambition was magnified by a cosmic dimension to their rivalry. As the lord of the barren desert, Set was the natural opposition to Osiris, who represented the fertile, life-giving power of the Nile and its annual flood. And so, in the shadows of his desert kingdom, a murderous plot began to form in Set's mind, a plot that would shatter the golden age and disrupt the perfect order of the cosmos forever. In his desolate kingdom of red sand and rock, the god Set watched the flourishing green valley of his brother, Osiris, and his heart was consumed by a burning jealousy. His own domain was one of harshness, of storms, of the sterile and the barren. His brother's was a realm of abundance, of gentle order, of music and laughter. This harmonious reign of Osiris and Isis, so perfectly aligned with Ma'at, was an intolerable contrast to his own chaotic nature. He resented his brother's popularity among both gods and mortals, he coveted his throne, and he desired the wise and powerful Isis for himself. This personal envy was magnified by a cosmic opposition. He, the lord of the desert, was the natural adversary of Osiris, the lord of the fertile Nile. And so, in the quiet, simmering darkness of his own heart, a murderous plot began to form, a plan to shatter the golden age forever. Set orchestrated his betrayal with cunning precision. He announced that he would host a magnificent banquet, a grand celebration in honor of his brother, the king. Imagine the scene, a great hall, filled with the sound of music and laughter, tables groaning under the weight of the finest food and wine. Osiris, the good and gentle king, arrived as the guest of honor, his heart open, suspecting no foul play from his own brother. Set had also invited 72 other guests, all of them secret co-conspirators in his dark design. As the festivities reached their peak, Set unveiled the centerpiece of his plan. He presented to the assembled guests an exquisitely crafted chest, made of the finest cedar and inlaid with ebony and ivory. He announced, with a magnanimous smile, that he would gift this beautiful chest to whomever among the guests it fit most perfectly. A light-hearted game began. One by one, the guests, including Set's other conspirators, tried the chest, but for each of them, it was either too large or too small. Finally, it was Osiris's turn. Trusting and unsuspecting, the king lay down inside the chest, remarking on its beauty and comfort. It was, of course, a perfect fit, for Set had secretly had it precisely measured to his brother's body. The moment Osiris reclined inside, the atmosphere in the great hall changed in an instant. The music stopped. The laughter died. Before the king could react, Set and his co-conspirators slammed the heavy lid shut, the sound echoing through the now silent hall like a clap of doom. They hammered it fast with nails, and then, to ensure their deed was irreversible, they sealed every crack with molten lead, transforming the beautiful chest into a dark and inescapable prison. They carried the heavy coffin from the hall, down to the banks of the Nile, and cast it into the great river. Thus died Osiris, the first king, victim of history's first recorded fratricide, his golden age drowned in the dark waters of his brother's jealousy. The chest, carrying the lost king, floated down the river, out into the vastness of the great green sea, and disappeared from sight. When the news of her husband's murder reached the queen, Isis, she was consumed by a grief so profound it seemed to shake the very foundations of the world. Yet, in her sorrow, she was also filled with a powerful and unwavering determination. She knew that her husband's soul could not find peace, could not begin its journey into the afterlife, until his body was recovered and given the proper funerary rites. And so, she began her own epic journey. In a ritual act of mourning, she cut off a lock of her beautiful hair and donned the simple, dark garments of a widow. Her great lamentations, the cries of a goddess for her lost love, were said to be so powerful that they moved even the sun god Ra in his heavens. Transforming herself into a swift and keen-eyed bird of prey, Isis began her relentless search. For months, she flew over the length and breadth of Egypt, her sorrowful cries echoing over the deserts and the marshlands. Guided by divine assistance from gods like Anubis, who had been sent by Ra to help her, she finally traced the path of the chest across the sea to the distant Phoenician coastal city of Byblos. There, the waters had carried the chest and deposited it on the shore, where a magnificent tamarisk tree had miraculously grown up around it, encasing the coffin completely within its trunk. The king of Byblos, admiring the great tree, had it cut down and fashioned into a beautiful, fragrant pillar for his royal palace, unwittingly enshrining the lost god of Egypt within his own home. The queen, guided by her divine intuition, had found her lost king. The first part of her great quest was over, but she knew, with a heavy heart, that the struggle to restore him was only just beginning. Upon learning of her husband's murder, a grief so profound that it seemed to shake the very foundations of the world consumed the goddess Isis. The news arrived not as a clear report, but as a chilling absence, a sudden silence in the cosmic music of Ma'at. The light had gone out of her world. In the grand palace where they had ruled together in perfect harmony, she was now alone. Her initial reaction was one of pure, unadulterated sorrow. In a ritual act of mourning that would be copied by grieving women for millennia to come, she cut off a lock of her beautiful, long hair. She tore at her fine linen robes, and she covered her face in dust. Her cries of anguish, her great lamentations, echoed through the empty halls, so powerful and so filled with sorrow that the Nile itself was said to stir in its bed, and the great sun god Ra, on his eternal voyage across the heavens, paused to listen. But Isis was more than just a grieving widow, she was a goddess of immense power and unwavering determination. She knew that her husband's soul could not find peace, could not begin its sacred journey into the afterlife, until his body was recovered and given the proper funerary rites that were essential for eternal existence. Her grief, as deep as the primordial ocean, now began to transform, crystallizing into a single, unshakable purpose. She would find him. No matter where the dark waters of the Nile had taken him, no matter how long the search, she would find her lost king. And so, using her great magical powers, she transformed herself into a swift and keen-eyed bird of prey, a kite, whose sorrowful cry would from that day on be associated with her lament. She soared high above the land of Egypt, her sharp eyes scanning every bend in the great river, every dense thicket of papyrus reeds, every quiet, hidden marsh. For months, she journeyed, her search relentless, her hope unwavering. The gods themselves, moved by her devotion, offered their assistance. The great sun god Ra, hearing her cries, sent the jackal-headed god Anubis, the master of sacred rites, to help guide her quest. Her long search finally led her out of the familiar black land of Egypt, across the Great Green, the Mediterranean Sea, to the distant Phoenician coastal city of Byblos. Here, her divine intuition told her, her husband's journey had ended. She did not arrive as a great and powerful goddess, but in the humble disguise of a grieving, mortal woman, her face veiled, her spirit heavy with sorrow. She sat by the city's main well, a place of gathering, and she waited, her quiet dignity and profound sadness drawing the attention of the handmaidens of the Queen of Byblos. Intrigued by this mysterious and graceful stranger, they brought her to the royal palace. There, her wisdom and her gentle nature so impressed the queen that she was made the royal nursemaid to the infant prince. This position allowed Isis to enter the great hall of the palace every day. And there, in the center of the hall, stood a magnificent and fragrant pillar, carved from a single, great tamarisk tree, which supported the very roof of the palace. Isis knew, with the certainty of a goddess and a loving wife, that her husband was inside. The chest containing his body had washed ashore here, and the sacred tamarisk tree had miraculously grown up around it, encasing the coffin of the lost god completely within its trunk. The king of Byblos, admiring the great and beautiful tree, had it cut down and fashioned into this central pillar, unwittingly enshrining Osiris within his own royal residence. Night after night, after the royal family was asleep, Isis would secretly revert to her bird form, circling the great pillar, her sorrowful cries the only sound in the sleeping palace. She used her magic to try and free her husband, but the task was too great. Finally, she knew she must reveal herself. One evening, she revealed her true, divine form to the Queen of Byblos, who was struck with awe and terror at the sight of the radiant, powerful goddess standing before her. Isis told the queen the entire tragic story of her husband's murder, of her long search, and of the sacred nature of the pillar that stood in the great hall. The king and queen of Byblos, filled with reverence, immediately gave her permission to do what she must. With great care, the pillar was taken down, and Isis herself cut it open, revealing at last the beautiful, exquisitely crafted chest within. Her long, sorrowful search was over. She had found him. Placing the sealed coffin upon a boat, she began the long, solemn journey back to the shores of Egypt, her heart filled with a mixture of profound relief and the heavy knowledge that her greatest and most challenging task, the restoration of her lost king, was still ahead. With the precious, sealed coffin of her husband safely aboard her boat, Isis began the long, solemn journey back to the shores of Egypt. As she sailed across the great green sea, her heart was a complex mixture of profound relief and heavy apprehension. She had found him. But she knew that her greatest and most challenging task, the restoration of her lost king, was still ahead. Upon reaching the shores of her homeland, she sought out a secluded and hidden place, a dense and quiet thicket of papyrus reeds deep in the Nile delta, a place where she believed she could work her magic, undisturbed. She carefully concealed the chest containing her husband's body, intending to use her powerful knowledge of divine words to bring him back to life. But the god Set, the lord of the desert, was ever watchful. His spies were everywhere, and his heart was still filled with a burning hatred for his brother. One night, as he was out hunting in the moonlight, his path, whether by cruel chance or by his own dark design, led him to the very thicket where Isis had hidden the chest. He recognized it instantly. A terrible, furious rage seized him. He realized that his brother was not truly gone, that his victory was not yet complete. Determined to ensure that Osiris could never be resurrected, never be given a proper burial, and thus never find peace in the afterlife, he committed a second, even more horrific act. He tore open the chest, dragged out the body of his brother, and with his great, chaotic strength, he dismembered the corpse, cutting it into 14 pieces. Then, to make his deed as irreversible as possible, he scattered these pieces far and wide, up and down the length of the Nile, casting them into the river and into the desolate lands of the desert. When Isis returned to her hiding place and found the empty chest, her grief was renewed, a fresh wave of despair washing over her. But her resolve did not break. She knew now that her task was even greater, even more urgent. She must not only find her husband, but she must reassemble him. And so, she began a second, even more arduous search. This time, she was not alone. Her gentle sister, Nephthys, who was also Set's wife, had been horrified by her husband's cruel and sacrilegious act. She chose to abandon her chaotic husband and join her sister in her sacred quest. Together, the two goddesses, their forms often depicted as protective kites, began the painstaking work of finding the scattered pieces of their beloved brother. For months, perhaps years, they journeyed, their search taking them to every corner of the land. Wherever they found a piece of Osiris's body, they would perform a sacred ritual and, in some tellings of the story, establish a temple to mark the spot. One by one, they found the 13 pieces, from his head to his limbs, gathering them with great care and reverence. But the 14th and final piece, his phallus, had been thrown into the Nile and eaten by a fish. It was lost to them forever. Despite this, Isis, with the help of Nephthys and the wise god Thoth, began the sacred and magical work of reassembly. They carefully pieced the 13 parts of his body back together, and Isis, using her immense magical power, fashioned a replacement for the lost 14th piece. Then, with the assistance of the jackal-headed god Anubis, who had now descended to perform his most sacred duty, they began the first embalming. They anointed the reassembled body with precious oils, wrapped it in clean, white linen bandages, and spoke the powerful, ancient words of magic over it. Through this sacred act, they created the very first mummy, establishing the funerary rites that would be practiced in Egypt for thousands of years to come. With the body now whole and preserved, Isis performed her greatest and most mysterious act of magic. Transforming once again into a bird, she hovered over the body of her husband, her great wings beating slowly, fanning the very breath of life back into him. In this mystical union, she conceived a child with the resurrected king. But Osiris's resurrection was not a full return to the world of the living. His body was restored, but his place was no longer among the mortals and the gods of the earth. His destiny now lay elsewhere. He would become the king and judge of the underworld, the lord of the afterlife, a symbol not of earthly life, but of the promise of eternal life beyond death. Isis, now carrying the heir to the throne of Egypt within her, knew that her child would be in grave danger. Set, who had usurped the throne, would surely seek to destroy the infant Horus as soon as he was born. And so, the great goddess fled once more, seeking refuge in the deepest, most inaccessible parts of the Nile Delta, in the hidden marshlands of Chemis. There, among the tall reeds and the quiet, watchful animals, she would give birth to her son and raise him in secret, nurturing the young god who would one day rise to avenge his father and reclaim his rightful throne. The seed of hope had been planted, and a new chapter in the great divine struggle was about to begin. Knowing that Set, who now sat upon the throne of Egypt, would stop at nothing to destroy the legitimate heir, the great goddess Isis fled. She sought refuge not in a fortified city or a grand palace, but in the deepest, most inaccessible parts of the Nile Delta, in the hidden marshlands of Chemis. Imagine this place, a dense, humid, and secret world, a labyrinth of towering papyrus reeds, of quiet, dark waterways, and the constant, gentle hum of insects. It was a place teeming with life, but also with hidden dangers. The waters were infested with crocodiles, and the air was thick with malarial fevers. Yet, it was here, in this isolated sanctuary, that Isis chose to give birth to her son and raise him in secret. There, amid the rustling reeds and the quiet lapping of the water, she brought forth her child, Horus. His very name means, the distant one, a reference perhaps to his conception after his father had become distant in death. In this secluded world, the great queen of the gods became a devoted mother. She nursed her infant son, hiding him from the ever-watchful eyes of Set's spies. She would whisper to him the stories of his father, the good King Osiris, telling him of the golden age that had been lost, and of the great destiny that awaited him. But the perils of this hidden childhood were many. Set's malevolent influence could be felt even here. Scorpions, serpents, and other venomous creatures, all agents of the chaotic desert god, haunted the marshes. The divine child was in constant danger. These perilous episodes, of Horus falling ill or being attacked by dangerous creatures, gave rise to a rich collection of magical texts and spells in Egyptian culture. For centuries to come, ordinary Egyptian mothers, when their own children were sick or in danger, would recite these incantations, which worked by magically identifying their child with the young Horus, and themselves with the powerful, protective magic of Isis, drawing on this divine precedent to overcome all harm. The most famous of these stories tells of a time when the young Horus was stung by a scorpion sent by Set. The poison was potent, and the child lay near death. Isis's grief and rage were so immense, so powerful, that her cry was said to have stopped the very sun boat of Ra in the heavens. She would not allow the cosmic order to continue while her own son, the future of that order, lay dying. The great god Thoth, the master of wisdom and magic, descended from the heavens to assist her. With his knowledge of divine words, he spoke a powerful incantation that drew the poison from the child's body and restored him to health. In each instance of danger, the unwavering devotion and powerful magic of Isis, sometimes aided by other benevolent gods, was enough to save her son. And so, in this world of lush green reeds and dark, quiet waters, Horus grew. He learned the ways of the marsh, becoming strong and resourceful. And his mother, the great magician, instilled in him not only the stories of his heritage but also the skills he would need for the great struggle that lay ahead. He was trained in combat and in the divine magic that was his birthright. He grew from a vulnerable infant into a powerful young god, his heart filled with the memory of his murdered father and a burning desire for justice. When he finally reached maturity, his body strong and his mind sharp, the time for hiding was over. The young prince was now ready to emerge from his long seclusion in the marshes. He was ready to challenge his treacherous uncle for the kingship of Egypt, to avenge his father, and to restore the cosmic order of Ma'at that had been so violently shattered. The seed of hope, so carefully nurtured in the secret marshes, was now a mighty tree, ready to face the storm. A new chapter in the great divine struggle was about to begin. When he reached maturity, his body strong and his mind filled with the wisdom of his mother, Isis, Horus, the son of Osiris, emerged from his long seclusion in the marshlands of the Delta. He journeyed to the great hall of the gods and there, before the divine tribunal presided over by the sun god Ra, he laid his claim to his hereditary throne. What followed was not a simple battle, but a prolonged legal and physical struggle that the Egyptians called the contendings of Horus and Set. This epic conflict, documented in ancient texts like the Chester Beatty Papyrus, was said to have lasted for 80 long years, and it encompassed both savage physical combat and intricate legal proceedings before the assembled gods. The gods themselves became divided. Some supported the legitimate claim of Horus, the rightful son and heir. His mother, Isis, and the wise god Thoth, were his most persistent and eloquent advocates, arguing for the restoration of Ma'at through the proper line of succession. But other gods favored Set. They argued that Horus was merely a boy, too young and inexperienced to rule, while Set was a god of immense strength and power, a warrior who stood on the prow of Ra's solar bark each night to defend it from the serpent of chaos. Even the great sun god Ra often wavered, at times favoring his elder descendant Set. This divine indecision prolonged the conflict, leading to a series of contests designed to test the worthiness of the two claimants. The struggle featured multiple episodes of deception, magic, and violence. In one famous episode, the two gods transformed themselves into hippopotami and battled in the deep waters of the Nile. In another, Horus, demonstrating his cunning intelligence over Set's brute force, tricked his uncle into a race with boats made of stone. Horus craftily fashioned his boat from wood, but plastered it to look like stone. Set, seeing this, carved his own boat from a massive block of granite, which, of course, immediately sank, leaving Horus to sail to an easy victory. In another, more famous episode of literal combat, the two gods fought with such ferocity that they inflicted cosmic wounds upon each other. Set, in his rage, tore out Horus's left eye, and the sky grew dark as the moon was extinguished. But the wise god Thoth intervened, using his powerful magic to heal the wounded eye, creating the famous Wedjat eye, which would become one of ancient Egypt's most powerful symbols of healing, restoration, and protection. Horus then took this newly restored eye and journeyed to the underworld, where he presented it as an offering to his deceased father, Osiris. This profound act of filial piety temporarily reinvigorated the Lord of the Dead and became the mythological precedent for all future offering rituals made to the gods and the ancestors. In one of the most shocking incidents of their long conflict, Set attempted to dominate Horus sexually, an act intended to humiliate his nephew and prove his own superiority. But the young god, with the help of his ever-watchful mother, Isis, managed to outwit his uncle. Horus caught Set's seed in his hand and, on his mother's advice, they disposed of it. In retaliation, Isis collected Horus's own seed and cleverly spread it on the lettuce leaves in Set's garden, lettuce being a favorite food of the desert god. When Set unknowingly consumed the lettuce, he became pregnant with the seed of his rival. In the divine court, when Set boasted of his dominance over Horus, the god Thoth called forth the seed, and to Set's great humiliation, it answered from within his own body. This episode, a powerful mythological metaphor for the triumph of intelligence over brute force, severely weakened Set's claim to the throne. Eventually, after 80 long years of struggle, the divine tribunal, persuaded partly by an eloquent and moving letter from the deceased Osiris in the underworld demanding that his son be given his rightful place, finally ruled in favor of Horus. The judgment was definitive. Horus received the throne of Egypt, and the cosmic order of Ma'at was restored. Set was not destroyed, for the Egyptians understood that the chaotic forces he represented were a necessary part of the cosmos. Instead, he was either banished to the desert or, in some versions of the myth, reconciled with his nephew and given dominion over foreign lands and the storms that raged in the sky. This resolution established the fundamental and eternal pattern for Egyptian kingship. From that day forward, every living pharaoh was considered the incarnation of Horus, the rightful ruler who maintains Ma'at on earth. And every deceased king became identified with Osiris, the resurrected lord of the afterlife. The great conflict was over. The usurper had been defeated, the avenger had claimed his throne, and the world, which had been thrown into chaos by the first great murder, was now returned to a state of divine harmony and balance under the rule of its rightful king. With the cosmic order restored and the rightful king upon the throne, the great divine drama of Osiris, Isis, and Horus established the eternal pattern not just for kingship, but for the journey of every human soul after death. The ancient Egyptians believed that a human being was a composite of many parts, both physical and spiritual. The physical body, the Khat, was essential, a vessel that needed to be preserved through the sacred art of mummification. But it was the spiritual aspects that truly defined a person. There was the Ka, a person's life force or spiritual double, which remained with the body in the tomb. And there was the Ba, often depicted as a bird with a human head, which was the unique personality and character of the individual, the part of the soul that could travel between the world of the living and the dead. The ultimate goal of the afterlife was to reunite these aspects into a single, glorified, and eternal being, Anak. Upon death, the Ba of the deceased would embark on a perilous journey through the Duat, the mysterious underworld, following the same path that the sun god Ra traveled each night. This journey was fraught with danger, filled with demonic creatures and gates guarded by fearsome deities. To navigate this treacherous landscape, the deceased was armed with the powerful spells and secret knowledge contained in their own personal copy of the Book of the Dead, a collection of funerary texts that served as a divine map and guidebook to the afterlife. After successfully navigating the trials of the underworld, the soul would arrive at its final destination, the Great Hall of Two Truths, the Judgment Hall of Osiris. Imagine a vast, silent, and awe-inspiring chamber, its pillars carved like bundles of papyrus reeds, its walls covered in sacred hieroglyphs. At the far end of the hall, seated on a magnificent throne, was Osiris himself, the Lord of the Dead, his green skin symbolizing resurrection, his hands holding the crook and flail, the symbols of his divine kingship. He was no longer the murdered king, but the just and powerful judge of all souls. Before him sat 42 other divine assessors, each one representing a different nome, or province, of Egypt, and each one responsible for judging a specific type of sin. Into this solemn assembly, the soul of the deceased would be led by the gentle, jackal-headed god Anubis. The first part of the judgment was the negative confession. Standing before the 42 divine judges, the soul would declare their innocence, reciting a series of statements, each one beginning with, "I have not. I have not stolen. I have not lied. I have not murdered. I have not been arrogant." This was not a confession of guilt, but a powerful affirmation of a life lived in accordance with the principles of Ma'at. Then came the central and most dramatic moment of the entire process, the weighing of the heart. The Egyptians believed that the heart, not the brain, was the seat of a person's intelligence, their emotions, their memory, and their conscience. It was the record of every deed, every thought, every impulse of a person's life. Anubis would carefully take the heart of the deceased and place it on one pan of a great, golden scale. On the other pan, he would place a single, pure white ostrich feather. This was the feather of the goddess Ma'at, the very symbol of truth, justice, and cosmic order. The scales would now determine the soul's eternal fate. As the balance wavered, the ibis-headed god Thoth, the divine scribe, stood ready with his palette and reed pen to record the verdict. And crouched at the foot of the scales, a terrifying creature waited patiently. This was Ammit, the devourer of the dead, a composite beast with the head of a crocodile, the forequarters of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus, the three most feared man-eating animals known to the Egyptians. Ammit was not a demon to be worshipped or feared, but the very embodiment of divine retribution. If the heart of the deceased was heavy with sin, with lies, with injustice, it would weigh down the scales, heavier than the single, light feather of truth. In this case, the verdict was damnation. The heart would be thrown to Ammit, who would devour it in a single gulp. This was the most terrifying fate an Egyptian could imagine. It was not an eternity of punishment, but an eternity of non-existence. The soul would be utterly annihilated, erased from the cosmos, a second death, from which there was no return. But if the deceased had lived a good and just life, if their heart was unburdened by wrongdoing, it would balance perfectly against the feather of Ma'at. The scales would remain level. Thoth would record the favorable verdict, and the soul would be declared Masikeru, true of voice. Osiris would give his final, divine approval, and the soul, now justified, would be granted passage into the eternal afterlife. Their Ka and Ba would be reunited, and they would enter the field of reeds, or Aru, the Egyptian paradise. This was a perfect, idealized version of their own beloved Nile Valley, a land of endless, bountiful harvests, of cool breezes, and of reunion with loved ones who had gone before. Here, they would live for all eternity in a state of blessed, peaceful existence, sometimes even joining the divine crew of Ra's solar bark on its eternal journey across the heavens. The long, difficult journey was over. The soul had come home. For the ancient Egyptians, the promise of eternal life was not a matter of mere hope or faith, it was a practical matter that required meticulous, sacred, and lifelong preparation. To facilitate the complex journey of the soul, and to provide a permanent anchor for the spiritual elements of the Ka and the Ba, they developed the world's most sophisticated techniques for preserving the human body. Mummification was not a morbid obsession with death, but a profound and optimistic affirmation of life, a belief so intense that they refused to accept its termination, developing instead an elaborate spiritual technology to ensure its continuation beyond the grave. This sacred art evolved over millennia, from simple burials in the hot desert sand, where the arid conditions naturally desiccated and preserved the body, to an elaborate, 70-day ritual procedure conducted by skilled and revered embalmers. Imagine a quiet, clean workshop, a place known as the House of Purification, filled with the scent of cedar oil, palm wine, and natron, a natural salt harvested from the desert wadis. Here, the deceased was brought to undergo their great transformation. The process began with the ritual washing of the body, followed by the careful, internal cleansing. The most vital organs, the liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines, were removed, individually mummified, and placed into 4 special vessels known as canopic jars. Each jar was protected by one of the 4 sons of the god Horus. Imsidi, with his human head, guarded the liver; Hapi, with his baboon head, protected the lungs; Duamutef, with his jackal head, watched over the stomach; and Kabasanuf, with his falcon head, safeguarded the intestines. These preserved organs were essential for the deceased to be whole again in the afterlife. The body was then covered, inside and out, with heaps of natron salt, and left for some 40 days, a period during which the salt would draw out all the moisture, desiccating the flesh and preventing decay. After this period of purification, the body was washed again, anointed with fragrant oils and resins, and the long, intricate process of wrapping began. With great reverence, the embalmers would wind hundreds of meters of fine linen bandages around the body, a process that could take over 2 weeks. Between the layers of linen, they would carefully place dozens of protective amulets, each with its own magical purpose: the ankh, a symbol of life; the jed pillar, representing the backbone of Osiris and symbolizing stability; and the powerful eye of Horus, the wedjat, to protect against all harm. When the wrapping was complete, the mummy, now a protected and eternal vessel for the soul, was placed in its coffin. But one final, crucial ritual remained: the opening of the mouth ceremony. At the entrance to the tomb, a priest would touch the mouth, eyes, nose, and ears of the mummy with a series of sacred instruments, ritually reanimating the body, magically restoring its senses so that the deceased could speak, see, hear, and receive nourishment in the afterlife. The physical preparations were now complete. The tomb itself was not seen as a place of death, but as a purjet, a house of eternity. It was conceived as a perfect, idealized, and unchanging home, equipped with everything the deceased would need for a comfortable and prosperous existence in the field of reeds. These eternal homes were often decorated with beautiful, vibrant scenes from the deceased's earthly life. But these were not mere decorations. They were powerful, magical images, designed to perpetually recreate these pleasant experiences for the soul. The walls would show the deceased hunting birds in the papyrus marshes, fishing in the bountiful Nile, overseeing the harvest in their fields, or feasting with their beloved family and friends. By depicting these scenes, it was believed that they would magically continue for all eternity. The tomb was also furnished with the real objects of daily life: furniture, clothing, toiletries, and games like senet to be played in the afterlife. And most importantly, food and drink were left in abundance to nourish the Ka, the vital life force of the deceased. Inscriptions on the walls, known as offering formulas, would magically provide eternal sustenance should the physical offerings ever cease. Statues of the deceased were also placed within the tomb, serving as alternate homes for the ka should the mummified body ever be damaged or destroyed. And everywhere, the deceased's name, their run, was inscribed, for to speak the name of the dead was to make them live again. Without a name, one's identity was lost, and one could not be called for offerings or remembered by the living. This created a profound, reciprocal relationship between the worlds of the living and the dead. The family's obligations to the deceased didn't end with the burial. They were expected to visit the tomb, to maintain the offerings, and to speak the all-important name of their ancestors. In return, the blessed dead, the Aku, now powerful and effective spirits dwelling among the gods, could intercede on behalf of their living relatives, protecting them from harm and ensuring their prosperity. This created a great, unbroken chain of community, a family that spanned the boundary between life and death. This holistic worldview, which saw death not as a final rupture but as a prepared-for and manageable transition, provided a deep sense of security and continuity, and was the bedrock upon which the remarkable stability of Egyptian civilization was built for 3,000 years. For nearly 3,000 years, the mythology of ancient Egypt provided a remarkably stable and comprehensive framework for understanding existence. It guided one of history's longest-lasting civilizations through changing dynasties, periods of foreign invasion, and profound cultural evolution, all while maintaining its essential character. Yet, even this enduring mythological system eventually faced its own twilight, a long and gradual decline, a transformation, and an apparent extinction. The story of how these ancient beliefs faded, and how they were paradoxically preserved and rediscovered, provides the final chapter in this epic mythological tradition. The decline occurred slowly, over centuries, rather than through a sudden collapse. During the late period, when Egypt faced repeated foreign invasions from powers like Persia, the traditional religion often intensified rather than weakened. In a great cultural response to these external threats, the Egyptians emphasized their distinctive religious traditions to maintain their cultural identity, even when their political independence had faltered. Ancient rituals were revived, and temple construction continued with a renewed emphasis on historical authenticity. After the conquest by Alexander the Great, the Greek Ptolemaic rulers positioned themselves as traditional pharaohs, adopting Egyptian royal regalia and performing the required religious roles, even as they introduced Hellenic cultural elements. It was during this period that some of the most magnificent surviving temples, like those at Edfu, Dendera, and Philae, were constructed or expanded, their walls covered with traditional mythological scenes. The Roman rule that began in 30 BCE initially maintained this policy of religious respect, with Roman emperors being depicted on temple walls in pharaonic dress, performing the ancient rites. The cult of Isis, in particular, demonstrated its continued vitality, spreading throughout the Roman Empire and becoming one of its most popular religions. The decisive challenge to traditional Egyptian religion came not from a change of rulers, but from the spread of a new faith, Christianity. By the 3rd century CE, Christian communities had established a significant presence in Egypt. This new monotheistic faith directly challenged the core concepts of Egyptian religion. It rejected the worship of multiple deities, it denounced the familiar animal-headed gods as demonic, and it offered a linear view of time and salvation that was fundamentally incompatible with the cyclical worldview of the Egyptians. Unlike previous foreign religious influences that had been absorbed and adapted, Christianity positioned itself as exclusively true, requiring the complete rejection of traditional practices. As Christianity gained imperial support in the 4th century CE, the active suppression of the ancient religion intensified. In the year 391, the Emperor Theodosius I issued an edict prohibiting pagan worship throughout the Roman Empire. The Great Serapeum of Alexandria, a major temple complex, was destroyed by a Christian mob that same year, a powerful symbol of the changing religious landscape. The ancient temples were abandoned, converted into churches, or dismantled for their stone. The traditional priesthoods lost their state support and faded away. The final outpost of the old gods stood on the southern border, on the beautiful island of Philae. Here, the temple dedicated to the goddess Isis, protected by its remote location, remained active until approximately 550 CE, when the Byzantine Emperor Justinian finally ordered its closure. With this act, the institutional worship of the Egyptian gods, after more than 3 millennia of continuous practice, officially ended. The most significant break, however, was the loss of knowledge. As the priesthoods disappeared, the ability to read the sacred hieroglyphs vanished. For over 1,000 years, the stories carved on the temple walls and written on the papyrus scrolls became a silent, unreadable mystery. The mythology of Egypt was remembered only through the often misunderstood accounts of classical Greek and Roman authors. The great rediscovery of authentic Egyptian mythology began with Napoleon's Egyptian expedition from 1798 to 1801. He brought with him scores of scientists and scholars who systematically documented the ancient monuments. Their findings, published in the monumental Description de l'Égypte, reintroduced Europe to Egypt's architectural and artistic achievements and stimulated a new, intense interest in deciphering the mysterious hieroglyphs. This scholarly quest culminated in 1822, when the brilliant French linguist Jean-François Champollion, using the trilingual Rosetta Stone, finally cracked the code. It was a moment of profound revelation. After nearly 15 centuries of silence, the ancient Egyptians could speak for themselves again. As scholars began to translate the pyramid texts, the coffin texts, and the Book of the Dead, a mythological world far more complex and sophisticated than previously imagined was revealed. This scholarly rediscovery, combined with spectacular archaeological finds like the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, generated a widespread fascination with ancient Egypt that continues to this day. Its vivid imagery and its engagement with universal human concerns ensure that it continues to resonate in our modern world. And so, our long journey through this mythological landscape comes to a close. The tradition of the ancient Egyptians now occupies a paradoxical position. It is dead as a living religious tradition, yet it is strikingly alive in our cultural memory and imagination. In the ancient Egyptian understanding, to speak the name of the deceased was to help them continue existing beyond physical death. And so, as we have spoken the names of Osiris and Isis, of Ra and of Hathor, of Thoth and of Anubis, we have, in our own way, participated in this ancient practice of remembrance. Though their temples have fallen and their priesthoods have dispersed, the gods of Egypt remain present in human awareness, a testament to the enduring power of these stories to express profound truths about existence. Like the Bennu bird, the phoenix, this mythology has undergone its own form of death and regeneration, transformed yet recognizable across the great distance of time. Now, as this final echo fades into the quiet of your room, let the great river of the story carry you gently into the peaceful ocean of sleep. There is nothing left to do, nothing left to explore. All that remains is rest.